What's good, everybody? Welcome to the Big Nate Review. It's your boy Big Nate, and today we have a quite frankly, it's a tragic and sort of devastating discussion to talk about. We're going to be talking about the California wildfires, which have been and still currently are taking place, which have just absolutely devastated that whole part of Southern California. But I wanted to use this event as a sort of launching point to talk about something that I've been thinking about for a while, honestly. I was actually going to do a video about this when Hurricane Milton happened, but I decided against it, and I was like, honestly, I figured there'd be another like major natural disaster taking place soon enough, and a few months later, here we are. And I wanted to basically talk about the idea of essentially climate change being the modern day version of the flood myth. I'm very much a believer that mythologies, which are stories which have been told all around the world for centuries and millennia, I believe that mythologies find expression in like the everyday world all around us, and especially in the modern day. These are stories and themes which repeat themselves just perennially over time. And I think the modern day flood myth, again, is what we are seeing now with climate change and our sort of corruption and pollution of the earth. And we'll get into all that, but that's going to be sort of like the major, I guess, idea of this video. But before we get to the mythological stuff and everything like that, I want to just talk about like the actual event of the fires itself. And like, I am not going to be able to do anything better than what like actual reporters and everything are doing. But just to give a basic lowdown, if you're not super familiar with it, the fire started January 7th, 2025, of course, this year. And today, as I'm filming this, is January 17th, and the fires are still ongoing. There's still a very large percent of it which is completely uncontained. And so it's been, again, almost 2 weeks. We're coming up on 2 weeks now of just these fires raging in California. And apparently the impetus of this was like a LA region. I don't know exactly. It's like that whole area. But they've been getting just unprecedented wind speeds. From what I've read, it's been around like, at least when it's first started, anywhere from like 60 to 80 miles per hour is just like constant wind speeds. And on top of that, California had been suffering from like, I think it was something like a record drought. So they just had months of like no rainfall at all. And so everything was extreme fire risk before it even happened was sort of announced. And what happened, I mean, it could take just the tiniest spark. You're basically just surrounded by kindling. So, if you've seen any of the footage from this, it truly is. It looks like hell on earth. And I think even more to the point of like the sort of mythological theme, Judgment Day kind of stuff. So I'm actually just going to play a couple clips from some videos I saw that I just kind of describe the situation and show actually what it kind of looks like on the ground. And again, it's very apocalyptic and hell on earth. So let's take a look at that.
You can see from this time lapse of the Palisades fire just how quickly it spread, fanned by hurricane force winds. And this is another neighborhood, Altadena. This satellite imagery shows the homes and buildings, street after street, completely engulfed.
The most catastrophic fires Los Angeles has ever seen. Overnight, the Hollywood Hills resembling a disaster movie. A huge crescent of flame engulfing an iconic community of California. More than 130,000 people have been told to evacuate their homes. 16,000 acres and counting consumed by the inferno. The scale of this disaster is clear to see. This is Pacific Palisades. Block after block, a blanket of destruction.
It's blowing south, so it is just throwing these flames over these hills and through these canyons.
So as you can see, the fires have just been absolutely devastating to California, and again, they're still ongoing. And just the way this looks, it literally looks like the end of the world. And that, along with just, again, it's an idea I've been thinking about, but this, event and the imagery of it just particularly reminds me of, again, the flood myth. And the flood myth is one of those myths that's found all around the world across all different types of cultures. Of course, most famously, like, Noah's Ark in the Christian mythology. There's a Hindu version of this myth. There's a Chinese version. There's an American indigenous version. And among many others, is one of the most prevalent mythological motifs in the world. Particularly apropos, I think, here is the Norse version of it, which sort of takes the form of Ragnarok, where a lot of these myths involve literally a flood, but Ragnarok is structurally, it's the same sort of myth, but instead of a flood, it's actually just like this, and basically the earth, the entire universe is just scorched into flames. So again, that's just all the more relevant here. But the flood myth, just in general, it has all these different manifestations across all these cultures, but the main structure of it is that humankind or some element of the earth becomes more and more corrupt, and oftentimes it takes the form of people becoming morally degraded and becoming sort of wicked, and just they become worse and worse and more evil. And God, basically, the fact being so appalled at his creation, decides to just flood and cleanse the earth and humankind and all the animals, and just to cleanse it and just completely wash everything away and destroy everything. Except in almost all versions of the myth, there's some small population that's like sort of spared, and this ends up being the seed of life, which after the great flood there is like this new rejuvenation and replenishment of the earth and all of its different beings and everything like that. So that's like the main story of the myth, and again, it has all its different local manifestations. But I kind of wanted to just walk through this, and I'm just going to give the most popular example, I think, which is the story of Noah's Ark and the flood of the Christian God. And I want to apply that to the modern day version, where I think climate change is the modern day form of the flood myth. So I'm just going to read some passages from the Holy Bible. I don't know what translation this is. This one's kind of one of those more modern ones, but I think that works out for our purposes. But it tells how the Lord observed that the human wickedness on the earth, and he saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. So the Lord was sorry he had ever made them and put them on earth. It broke his heart. And the Lord said, I will wipe this human race I have created from the face of the earth. I will destroy every living thing. I am sorry that I ever made them. So that's the element of the myth where there is like this moral degradation, this moral corruption. And it talks about, I'm not reading the whole story, but there is very much this emphasis on how humankind is just essentially become more and more degraded to now they're just thinking purely evil thoughts. And God is essentially so appalled that he decides to cast down the flood, and he informs Noah and everything. And then just also, this is sort of a fun little tidbit. So when Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the second month, all the underground waters erupted from the earth. And I think it's just crazy. I don't think people realize this, but the Bible actually has there's like these giant titan beings, and like people live to be like 600, 700, 900 years old. I don't think people realize about that. It's crazy. But the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. The rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights. The flood waters grew deeper, covering the ground and lifting the boat high above the earth. Finally, the water covered even the highest mountain on the earth, rising more than 22 feet above the highest peaks. All the living things on earth died: birds, domestic animals, wild animals, small animals that scurry along the ground, and all the people. Everything that breathed and lived on dry land died. God wiped out every living thing on earth. So that is the flood. And, of course, there is the element where he instructs Noah to build the ark and to take, it's like 2 of each creature, but also like 7 of each creature. Basically, he takes every single, some little, again, the seed, which is going to be that replenishes new life. So he takes every, some sample of every single different species, and they're basically chilling on this ark. The earth is flooded for, hundreds and hundreds of days before eventually it recedes. Then God says to Noah, leave the boat, all of you. Release all the animals, the birds, the livestock, and the small animals that scurry along the ground, so that they can be fruitful and multiply throughout the earth. And that's very much God's message to Noah and, the animals, is just go forth and multiply, propagate the rest of the earth, and, bring new life unto the planet. Just fun little fact is that the origin of the rainbow, like the mythological origin of the rainbow for Christianity, is it was God's sign of his covenant never to do that again. So anytime like the rains start coming down, the rainbow is the reminder to him to, he made a promise that he would never flood the earth again. But so that's just, one example of the many different manifestations of the flood myth. And I think, again, it has, when we apply this to the modern day, I think it's very much the same story. So humanity, with respect to earth, we have done nothing but corrupt and pollute our actual planet. We have dumped billions, like it's unfathomable to think about. A ton is 2,000 pounds, and we have dumped billions upon billions of coal and fossil fuels just into the atmosphere. And like the earth is, a closed system. There's a reason that the sun doesn't just scorch us when it's shining directly onto the earth. And it's because we have an atmosphere which protects us and sort of insulates us in almost like a greenhouse. And that's where like the greenhouse gas does. But the reason we don't just suffocate in space is because we have like this closed bubble which it produces the atmosphere that we can breathe. But we have just dumped billions upon billions of tons of just black sooty smoke into our atmosphere. We're basically hotboxing the earth with pollution. And that's not even a joke. Like that's just facts. And on top of that, we've just raised our all the forests and jungles to the ground. We have just dumped again, hundreds of thousands, probably millions, probably even billions of just waste and trash and poisonous toxins and chemicals into our oceans. I think it's like a remarkable and tragic fact that there is trash that is found in the Marianas Trench, which is like the deepest explored point of of Earth's ocean. There's trash that's found at the bottom there, which is just, absolutely insane. We're fracking the Earth's crust, and we're basically on a speed run to just fuck up the Earth. And I think we're very much, because climate works on these long time scales, there haven't been like immediate effects, but we are very much coming to, and I think again, this is what it looks like now, we're coming towards our reckoning. Because when you think about it, the Earth really is kind of like an organism. I'm not saying it's like, a live organism in that sense, but it is like this ecological system which has been curated and maintained for millions of years. And the balance of this ecological climatological system just hangs in a very fine balance, and we have basically done everything in our power to just disrupt it as irrevocably as we can. And just like an organism too, and a self-sustaining sort of system, it tries to maintain homeostasis. Just like an organism, if some foreign body enters your system, or if you get a wound, or any number of things, the body has a response. It has a reaction to whatever that corrupting sort of force is. And it's the same principle for the Earth. You throw the balance out of whack, and it is going to respond in turn. It is going to try and correct itself. And I think the increase, like these innumerable natural disasters that we've been seeing popping up in recent years, this is the Earth's reaction. This is the Earth trying to maintain its homeostasis. And I think this is unfortunately just the beginning, but this does really, I think, fit the flood myth in the sense that humanity has come, and since you could say something like the Industrial Revolution, we have just been corrupting and degrading the Earth more and more and more. And eventually it's just reached such a point that there needs to be this sort of cleansing, purging agent, which I think, again, we're beginning to see now with like all these different natural disasters. The insane increase of hurricanes and tornadoes. Hurricane Milton and Helene just happened back to back. Tornadoes, earthquakes, wildfires, just all the different ways in which the Earth can really make its power and almost, like its rage, symbolically speaking, known. I think we're beginning to see the sort of manifestations of that. And another myth that came to mind when I was thinking about this is actually the sort of the theft of fire. And this has sort of been associated in many ways, like the Promethean idea of, the discovery of fire for mankind. It's like rationality and technology and sort of like enlightenment in that sense. That's one interpretation of it. But in the African version of these mythologies, or at least, for some tribes, the discovery of fire, the theft of fire, is always paired with like the burning down of all villages. Like there is a very negative, destructive aspect to it. And it's actually through that destruction like that the African tribes realize like, oh, hey, look, this actually like cooks meat and it can mend our pots. And fire is actually a wonderful tool, but again, it has that destructive element. And if you interpret the discovery of fire as being like the discovery of technology and modern rationality and everything, for instance, Oppenheimer, there's that whole biography, he's called the American Prometheus. So this idea is that with the benefits and boons of modern technology, there's also this destructive aspect. And I think in many ways, us right now and the Earth and its reaction and climate change, this is our mythological equivalent of, the African villages being burnt. And, what to do with this? Like, I think from a mythological perspective, there's one argument that it's already too late. Like, we're already fucked. God has closed the door and the floodgates have opened. But if we want to interpret this moving forward in a mythological sense, what comes to mind for me is I think, returning to those sort of values and cultures of, so many different traditions, but what really particularly, like, I think the indigenous Americans have a very pronounced respect and reverence and awe for the Earth, just like as a interconnected system where, you can't do one thing to the Earth without it ultimately coming back around to you in some way, and everything is connected and there's this ultimate harmony. And I think we really need to adopt those types of values and seriously put those into practice. And what that might look like, for instance, something like a symbolic offering to the gods would, I think, be taking seriously the idea of renewable energy and just stop, fundamentally just stop polluting and corrupting the Earth. We have all around us all these different natural forms of energy which just need to be harnessed and which are clean and, again, renewable, sustainable, and have an actual harmony with the Earth. But instead what we do is just keep polluting it and polluting it and polluting it, and as if there's going to be no consequences. Like, it's actually, this is where where the monkey brain of human beings, I think, really starts to show, because we just not giving it thought, like, oh sure, we can just burn billions of tons of coal into the atmosphere, that won't be a problem. And we've known about this problem for decades, but yeah, we're just going to keep on doing it. I think we need a real fundamental shift in how we think and treat the earth, and like our relationship to it as fundamentally an expression of the earth. We are but one aspect, one component of this tremendous system, which is this planet. And we've just, I think, been very disrespectful toward that. And I think it's the consequences of that are beginning to be shown in climate change. So if you made it this far, thank you for watching. I'm very curious what other people think about this idea. You know, is this just sound like total bullshit, or do you kind of buy it? What are your thoughts on this whole situation? The California wildfires, just, you know, anything. I'm curious what people think. Thank you again for watching. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, follow me on Instagram at Big Nate's Book Reviews, and thank you once again for tuning in to the Big Nate Review.